Good morning. Good morning. So welcome to today's webinar, The Role of Youth Peer Advocates in Residential Settings. Working in a youth residential setting presents unique challenges for youth peer advocates due to the environment and youth needs. Today, our presenter, Megan Simpson, will help you to gain valuable insight into the role, responsibilities, and expectations of youth peer advocates in a residential setting, as well as discussing collaborating with a multidisciplinary team, establishing professional boundaries, YPA crisis intervention, and wellness strategies. Today's webinar is presented by Megan Simpson, as I mentioned, who is a youth peer advocate and is the youth training coordinator of the Training and Workforce Development Department at Families Together in New York State. Megan intends to educate YPAs on trauma and trauma-sensitive practices in order to provide the community with the highest quality of care. And she will also introduce herself at length in a few minutes. Before we get started, I just wanted everyone to know that you are on mute to avoid any background noises. But if you need anything, you can chat to Vanessa, who is our host today, if you have any technical issues or any questions around participating in today's event. We do love questions and we love to hear from you, our audience. So please, at any time, chat with us. I will be actively on the chat and watching and helping to you share your answers with Megan and others. So please chat in. I know Megan's going to ask you some questions, but also if you have questions for her, please chat them in and we collect those during the time. And then we'll have a little time for Q&A at the end. Okay. So we are together until 1 o'clock, and I'm now going to pass it over to Megan, and thank you all so much for being here.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. I'm really excited to present this information for you. So let's jump right in. A little introduction slide. I just want you guys to know that throughout this training, there's a lot of very thorough content on each slide. I'm not going to be going over all of the points, but there's a lot of different examples that will be relevant for YPAs. So a little bit about me. So I'm going to talk about my professional experience and some of my personal. Professionally, I'm currently the youth training coordinator for Families Together in New York State. I also co-founded Now She Speaks, which is a domestic violence and interpersonal violence nonprofit, and we provide a peer support perspective as well as free community trainings. I also have experience as a YPA working in high schools. I have been a clubhouse program assistant, and I worked my way up to be a group therapy program supervisor. I have experience working in 2 different youth residential settings. One was a low-risk setting, and the other one was very high-risk. I have experience working with youth and adults with severe mental, emotional, and behavioral health challenges. I've also worked with victims and survivors of domestic violence and interpersonal violence, LGBTQIA individuals, and reentry felons. Currently, I have an associate's degree in social science and human services, and I am in my senior year getting my bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary social science and a minor in African American studies. So a little bit about me personally and my motivators for developing such a training as this. I am a survivor of multiple types of abuse and serious trauma. In my youth, I did reside in a residential setting for an extended period, so I do have personal experience with this. And my lived experience is my primary motivator to develop all of the trainings that I focus on. And I'm very focused on trauma-informed information because I really want to improve the quality of care that we're providing. So I'm really happy for everyone that is here, and I'm really happy for how this information is going to benefit the people that you work with. So now I'd like to know a little bit about you guys. If you want to share your name, city, organization, your role and position, and your reason for attending in the chat. Looking forward to knowing who's here and what are you guys interested in?
We have Mary Belia. Hope
Hello.
I'm saying hello. From Madonna Heights, RTF in Dix Hills, New York. Mary is a transition supervisor. We have Faith Beatty. Welcome, Faith. Welcome, Mary. We have Jeff Feevey from Buffalo. or Fivey. I'm so sorry if I'm not saying your names correctly. Doug and Buffalo, MHA of WNY, YPA coordinator, interested in the topic. Lena Nieves, youth peer advocate at Madonna Heights RTF. John Jack Licata, a mental health advocates of WNY, a youth peer advocate. Mohammed from Brooklyn, CCM YPA. And my reason for attending is to learn more about how I can assist youth of all experiences and backgrounds. Amazing, thank you. And Faith is from Rochester.
I love
Carol,
there's so many people present, so many peer advocates and program directors and supervisors. Excellent, excellent.
yes, we have Becca from the Waite House in Glen Falls. Blaze from GLYS WNY in Buffalo. Joe McDowell from Buffalo. Katie, amazing. Thank you all for being here. We have Jay, a YPA with St. Christopher Ottilie Family of Services, working across Long Island and Queens. I'm attending because my supervisor recommended it to expand my knowledge about different YPA opportunities. Great. Isamar Padilla, social worker, interested to hear more about RTC settings and further support youth. Mary Seitz, field office in Syracuse. Hello, Mary. Park Sauter, MHA of WNY as a YPA. And Jeff Fivey is Director of Peer Services, wants to learn more about this topic. Shane King is at Catholic Charities of Cortland County, who works as an adult care coordinator and just received a link an hour ago. So welcome, Shane. Curious about the training. Alyssa is with Access Supports in Middletown, transitional care coordinator, attending because she's just starting the position and thought it would be beneficial to know more before working with youth. Great. John. Good morning, John. From New York State OMH Office of Advocacy and Peer Support Services in Albany, New York, and intending to learn more about youth peer advocates. Bianca, supervisor. Renata from Buffalo. Christina, OMH residential director. Welcome, Christina, at the Western region. Marcia Tab from Buffalo, New York. Best self. They would like to see how peer advocates can enhance the individuals we serve and how to best support them. Faith is also a parent with a child in an RTF right now and looking to learn more. Anwar Williams at Glen Cove EOC office supervisor would like to better the work with youth. Nicole Shields, a YPA program manager. And Lynn Oliveras, family support worker. Awesome. Wow, thank you all so much for being here. You have a great group, Megan.
I am so excited to see such a diverse set of people. We have parents, we have directors, we have individuals who don't even work in residential settings. This is fabulous. I'm really excited that you are all here. Thank you for your introductions. All right. So I really want to start off with this quote because I feel like this quote emphasizes the importance of looking past the negative behaviors of youth and really focusing on what they are feeling and experiencing that is causing the behavior. Youth in residential settings are going to really struggle with some behavioral health challenges, and that can really impact us working with them, and it can impact our perceptions of them. So I really want to emphasize that there is no bad kid. Every youth in a residential setting is struggling. Every youth in the setting is someone who has endured abuse, survived trauma, and they have specifically learned unhealthy patterns of behavior. What they're doing is what they've learned, and they haven't learned healthier behaviors yet. So when working with these individuals, we must remember that these youth need patience, they need compassion, and understanding. So I want to talk about what is a residential setting. There's a few different types of residential settings. We're going to be focusing on a residential treatment facility, which is an RTF, and a children's community resident, which is a CCR. Residential treatment facilities are very high risk. Individuals in this setting are going to have more severe challenges. There are security locks on every single door. Youth are not permitted to leave the residence or the campus. And then youth might not visit their parents or their guardians on the weekends. It might be a long extended stay. At RTFs, there might be individuals from across the state who reside there because they need that high level of care. For CCRs, it's going to be more of a low risk setting, okay? They're going to go to the school in the community instead of on campus. They're oftentimes going to be visiting their parents. Usually with CCRs, the youth attending that environment are youth that live locally, so within an hour distance of that location. Whereas RTFs, you might have a youth in that setting who lives 4 hours away. So they have a lot of different similarities. They're providing a lot of the same services. The biggest difference is low risk versus high risk in how they secure the setting. Some other types of residential settings include hospitals, inpatient hospital visits, intensive psychiatric hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and youth group homes that might be focused on different things. So youth in residential settings often have involvement in a variety of different systems. So youth who have been removed due to emergency CPS cases, youth without a primary guardian, youth who are at risk of being sentenced to juvenile detention, youth with severe mental illnesses such as schizophrenia, youth who have attempted suicide and are engaging in self-injurious behavior, youth who have survived severe trauma or chronic abuse. There's a lot of different types of needs in service involvement that these youth are going to experience. All times when a youth is in a residential setting, they have already received other types of services. A residential setting is never the first option. It's usually one of the last options that they want to avoid because they don't want to put this youth in that setting. It is the most intensive type of care that is used as a necessity after every other type of support has been exhausted. So I wanted to give some insight into what youth say about YPAs. How do youth feel about having a YPA supporting them? The biggest thing I want to draw attention to is that YPAs inspire the youth to want to get better. And that inspiration is going to really impact the youth's involvement and engagement in their treatment. Youth feel like they're actually respected and treated as an equal by YPAs. And then there are times when some staff at residential settings don't respect or support the youth in the way that they need and want. And a YPA is able to come in and support that. So just take a second to look at some of these quotes and really consider how is this benefiting the youth? They made me feel empowered that I could recover, that recovery is possible. I will say in my personal experience residing in a residential setting, I truly believed that there was no recovery for me. I truly believed that I was too damaged and too traumatized. Having a YPA, knowing that someone could go through what I went through and be successful and be happy and be able to heal, that empowered me. So it's also going to empower other youth. So getting into some of the roles and principles of a YPA, we're going to talk about these roles and principles specifically in a residential setting. But I'd like to know, what do you feel the YPA roles and principles are? How do you utilize these principles to support the youth that you're working with? And you can just put your answers in the chat. Okay. Any ideas? I want to hear from these YPAs. How do you use this principle in practice? Modeling recovery, absolutely. Okay. Sounds like we're kind of struggling with some of this. All right. Oh, helping youth recognize their own. Okay, I spoke too soon. Here we go. All right. Helping youth recognize their own strengths and resilience. Absolutely. Transparency and vulnerability. Teaching them how to use their voice. Absolutely. Teaching them self-advocacy skills. Encouraging them to build community. Yep. Connecting with the youth on similar personal experiences. Yes, absolutely. All of these are great responses. Dive in. We're going to go through each of these principles one at a time and talk about the role in a residential setting. So first we have advocacy, efficacy, and empowerment. Youth in residential settings frequently feel like they are failures, that their entire being is just a failure and a burden, and that they're not going to succeed in life. As a YPA, we really want to help the youth identify what their strengths are and what their accomplishments are. When a youth demonstrates a positive quality or characteristics, we want to immediately identify that strength and acknowledge it, even if it's something minor. Like this, for example, if a youth has struggled with routines in the past, and then they successfully complete a routine on one day, we want to acknowledge that, no matter how small this achievement is. So this is going to help the youth begin to learn about what positive qualities that they have. Giving praise for any accomplishment, even the small ones, is going to build their self-confidence. If a youth dismisses the significance of a small accomplishment, that's totally okay. What you can do is clarify how that accomplishment can be applicable to other situations or future endeavors. So we can also ask youth openly what they think they are good at. What do they identify that they're proud of themselves for? For example, someone who has struggled with cutting, maybe after being in a residential setting for several weeks, they have gone several weeks without self-harm. So we want to acknowledge that as an achievement. We can also help them to identify what goals they have. We want to encourage the youth to use their own voice and express their own goals and their perceptions. So I'm going to jump back to the chat and some of these different responses that we have. Being patient. Yep, we understand as YPAs, letting them know that just because you hurt right now doesn't mean that you will not heal and be able to help someone else. Absolutely, absolutely. Being an example of having trauma, disabilities, and illnesses and still being successful and not allowing these things to limit me or limit them. Absolutely, thank you for that. So there's also more ways that we can use advocacy, efficacy, and empowerment in our role. As part of advocacy, we want the youth to be fully informed about their rights receiving professional services. This includes the nuances of HIPAA, and this is something I really want to draw attention to because most youth are not aware to what extent their information is protected. So when you are talking to youth, I really want us to emphasize talking about HIPAA. In my experience working in residential settings, none of the youth that I engaged with knew about HIPAA or how their information was protected. So we want to give youth examples of this. So if a staff member is talking to another youth about someone else's challenges, that's a violation of HIPAA, and that is something that does occur in some residential settings. We want the youth to know that this is a violation and that they themselves can express this to the program supervisor or to the other channels that they trust and feel secure in. It's also something that we want to teach kids to take forward with them from here on out when it comes to their information and their privacy and their right to privacy. So we want to teach how to advocate for themselves in the appropriate way, because we never want youth to feel like, oh, HIPAA's been violated, now I can speak up and speak against that staff to them. We don't want to encourage a conflict. So what we want to teach is that if a youth feels their HIPAA has been violated, first, they should speak with the program supervisor. If they do not feel supported, then they can speak to the director. Now, we have to keep in mind that at any point, a youth can contact the Justice Center with a complaint if they feel that they are being mistreated. And we do want to support this. However, we do want to encourage youth to be able to resolve these different challenges on a small local level. And that's so that way we can increase those communication skills, we can increase chain of command, we can also increase the youth's trust in the people who are actively supporting them in that moment. So always inform your supervisor if you recognize that HIPAA has been broken. All right, moving right along to engagement and bridging. Youth in residential settings feel that they have no power, no control, and no say regarding the treatment or their daily activities. They've been placed in this environment, and now all of their control, all of their say, personal perceptions, they feel that it's been negated. So we really want to try and give youth the opportunity to engage and develop their own perceptions of treatment so that they feel empowered. The expectations of following a new structure with strict rules can be very difficult for youth to adjust to. At any opportunity, we want to give them the power. We want to try and provide options instead of making the decision for them. Now, this can be very simple options such as, what do you want for lunch? Do you want to eat lunch? Some youth do not want to go to school. We cannot force a youth to go to school. We can provide them with options. Option one, you go to school, you complete your schoolwork, you come back, and then you're able to complete routine. Option two, you don't go to school. There are consequences that you need to be aware of, but that is your choice. So now they don't feel forced. They have these options and they can make the whatever decision they want. And as YPAs, we don't cast judgments. We don't label that decision as that's the bad decision or that's the good decision. We want to fully accept what decision that youth made and allow it to be, and still continue to support the youth and be consistent. We also want youth to develop their own goals for treatment, so that way they feel empowered and have a say in their treatment plan. So any healthy goal that a youth is motivated to accomplish is valuable, even if it's not necessarily related to their mental health. Some youth might have challenges with the expectations of their treatment, so we want to encourage them to identify one expectation that they feel like they can accomplish. They can accomplish sticking to routine. Excellent. If they struggle with following routine, maybe it is they can accomplish self-responsibility and complete their chores in a timely manner, but they struggle with the routine. And that's okay. We want to identify what do they feel good at and encourage that. So being the bridge between the youth and their providers, we can do this by clarifying both the youth's perspective to the providers and the provider's perspective to the youth. As YPAs, we are that middle person. We're kind of translating the language and the feelings that are occurring between these two individuals. We want to coach, we want to support, and we always want to focus on the youth's strengths, emphasizing their accomplishments and their individual goals. And I know I keep saying that when we focus on the youth's strengths and we prioritize that, but I really want that to be something that we take with us, because youth do not feel like they're accomplishing anything. Again, youth in a residential setting feel like they are failures and that their family or other people perceive them as failures. So we want to take any opportunity to challenge that. So when it comes to more engaging and bridging, a YPA can collaborate on the strengths-based approach, share the youth's perspectives. They can also attend different treatment plan meetings. That's something we're going to get into more, talking about the responsibilities of a YPA. And they can attend different appointments and then support the youth. Now, when a YPA is attending these different appointments, they should never be speaking on behalf of the youth. They should be encouraging the youth to use their own voice and providing that backup support. So we always want to encourage supportive relationships. We want to avoid being the youth's primary support staff, which is something that happens in residential settings. A youth may feel very respected and trust that YPA. So anytime that there's a challenge or they're upset, they immediately want only the YPA. We want to try to avoid that. Always encourage youth to identify other staff in the setting that they trust and feel comfortable talking to. When a youth wants to do an activity with you, ask them if another staff member could join too on that activity. And that way we are building that familiarity, that trust, and that relying on other supports. We also want youth to learn healthy social skills through engaging with their peers. Spend time with the youth, not only one-on-one, going for walks or eating lunch independently, but also as a group doing an activity like playing a game, going to the rec room, or going into the community. Remember that as a YPA, you should never be counted as the staff to youth ratio with a group of youth. As a YPA, your scope of practice might not include all of the responsibilities of a day staff member. So we shouldn't be counted as the staff to youth ratio because we're also not supposed to be performing any sort of restraints or anything like that, which might be a concern if we don't have another staff member to support us. So youth who have stayed in residential settings for extended periods often have difficulties adjusting to being home on the weekends or transitioning back to home. The number of supports have been significantly reduced once they return home. As a YPA, you want to support the youth in identifying what individuals in their home setting do they trust? Can they go to? Can they contact? Encourage them to identify these. And also, while you're working with the youth in the residential setting, encourage them to call home, call mom, call dad, grandma, uncle, friend, whoever, to continue building that supportive relationship. All right. So before we get into skill building, I want to know, what skills do you as YPAs help youth build, and how do you go about that skill? Put it in the chat. Coping skills. Yep, absolutely. We teach a lot of coping skills. Teaching self-advocacy. Oh, and helping them through role play. Excellent, excellent. Role play is a great way to teach a skill. Positive self-image and self-confidence. Yep, talking about his body language. Absolutely. Social connections, advocacy, establishing healthy communication styles and boundaries. Discussing boundaries is important to do with the youth we're working with. Examples and trial and error. Yep. Youth have to be able to make their own mistakes. They have to be able to learn independently and go through it. So if they make a difficult decision, or if they struggle to accomplish a skill, we still have to be accepting of that. Journaling, a coping skill. Yep. Self-advocacy and awareness. Learning how to advocate for themselves and including their input in treatment process. Yep. Helping youth identify what they're great at and what they may not do so good. Absolutely, absolutely. All of those things are really valuable for skill building. Thank you. Love the responses. So there's a lot of skill building that we can do, a lot. One of the ways that we can do this that I really want to encourage YPAs and supervisors to implement is support groups. A YPA leading a peer support group. This is a great opportunity to teach skill building, not just to one youth, but to an entire group of youth. They're all going to be at different stages. So what we consider success might be different from what the youth considers success. So keep that in mind. We can teach a variety of skills related to mental health, addiction, coping skills, positive socialization, skills development as a general, and as well as systems experience. Now, not all of these might seem like strictly skill building, but when we're discussing things like our systems experience, through just discussing that, that is developing healthy communication skills. It's developing social skills, maintaining and developing. We're also going to be considering boundaries. Can the YPA say, hey, that's a little too much information, but thank you for being vulnerable with us? Or, hey, you don't have to share anything that you're not comfortable sharing. Now we're empowering the youth, and we're also teaching different boundaries. More on skill building, we want to teach emotional regulation skills. And this is, again, important, and it's something we have to be patient on because not all youth in residential settings are going to have emotional regulation skills. Some youth are. Some youth are going to be very self-aware on their challenges. Some youth are going to be able to identify and label their feelings, but they might not accept it. They might not feel validated. They might not know how to cope with it. Other youth are not going to have any self-awareness on their behavior. They're going to really struggle with their feelings. They're not going to have a sense of self-acceptance. And that's something to keep in mind. We also want to meet them where they are at. Someone who has self-awareness, great, we can work with them and connect with them and be able to help them reflect on themselves and use that as a strength. But someone who doesn't have that self-awareness, we have to find a different way to support them and teach them the self-regulation skills. We want to do this in a non-clinical way, very much conversation, smooth, casual. Try to avoid coming off in a clinical or therapist type of way. I can say that when I was working in one residential setting, I came from a clinical setting and then went into that residential setting. So at one point I was working with a youth and he told me straight out, ma'am, no therapy stuff. And I really had to catch myself because I was like, you're right, I'm stepping out of my role. I'm using the language that doesn't work for you. I'm not connecting with you on that equal. So keep that in mind. If you've worked in different types of settings, make sure that you're checking yourself to make sure that you are staying within your role and you're able to present yourself in a way that the youth will connect. So there's a lot of different life skills that we can teach. Job skills, having a discussion on that, personal responsibility, maintaining their room, chores, routine, time management, healthy hygiene. There's a lot of different skills that we can teach. But remember to give the power and the opportunity to make a possibly poor decision. We want to allow the youth to learn themselves. And when I say poor decision, I don't want to label it as the bad decision or the wrong decision. That's language that the youth isn't going to appreciate. It's a poor decision because it has consequences. Using the term poor takes away a lot of the negative stigma associated with bad or wrong. Remain compassionate and consistent in accepting despite a poor decision. If we don't have hope that every youth, no matter how unhealthy or negative their decisions are, if we don't have hope that they can recover and be successful, how can we expect that youth to have hope that they can recover and be successful? We have to set the example for them. The moment that we lose hope in a youth, they instantly know it. Instantly, because our behavior is changed. And youth who have experienced abuse are very hypersensitive to someone's body language, their tone, their paralinguistics, how they interact with others, what they say. They're going to pick up on a dramatic change in how you perceive them. And it's going to impact them. So build connections and be relatable. Youth in residential settings struggle with intense feelings of rejection. They feel that they have been secluded from their family, friends, and the outside world because of their challenges. So now they label their challenges as a burden, and because they are the ones engaging in that challenge, they themselves, again, feel like that failure. They are the burden, they are the problem, and it's not necessarily their behaviors or their mental health that they're struggling with. Youth in residential settings don't view the residential setting as a help. They view it more in the perspective of jail. They view it as kid jail, and we don't want them to feel that way. So a YPA can make a significant impact on the youth because a YPA is a healthy support. They have an equal balance of power. It is someone the youth can relate to. Youth feel accepted by YPAs and they find companionship. And that can be really important when you are a youth in this setting who feels like they have no connections and no one who feels that they are good. So always remember that regardless of your shared experiences, it takes time for youth to build trust and familiarity with you. Start small, slow, casual, engaging activities. Allow the relationship to build organically over time, and don't take it personal if the youth avoids you, pushes you away, doesn't want to engage. Engagement and YPA support is always voluntary. So now we have promote recovery. As someone with lived experience, YPA should model the success of recovery and healing through strategic disclosure of their experience. By sharing their involvement, receiving treatment, and how they recovered, a YPA is going to demonstrate to the youth how they can and will overcome these challenges. And we've already talked a little bit about how we role model recovery, and I also saw some different good points in the chat about how we promote recovery. So a YPA not only promotes recovery through sharing their personal success story, but also by assisting the youth in understanding their current challenges and developing their motivation to actively engage in treatment and recovery for healing. So YPAs and supervisors, please take note of this. What is not the role of a YPA? What is not in your scope of practice? First, a YPA needs to maintain professional boundaries at all times, and this includes clarifying their scope of practice to anyone. A YPA in a residential setting might be asked to do tasks that are not in their scope of practice. For example, a day staff member might ask a YPA to take a group of youth to the rec room. However, a YPA should not be counted in the staff to youth ratio. So taking the youth to the rec room is going to violate that. Even though the YPA is capable of that, they shouldn't be alone with all of these youth, because if there was a challenge, it's not within the YPA scope of practice to address some certain challenges. So a YPA should not be the first responder to crisis intervention. This is not within our scope of practice, and it can also impact the YPA's mental health. So if there is a crisis, the YPA can be a support, but they should never be taking the lead. And if the youth wants to talk to the YPA only, what you can do is encourage another staff member to sit in. Yes, I as the YPA can talk with you, but can another staff member sit with us too? Who else do you trust? That way, the YPA is not the sole support, and we're still building connections with other supports. A YPA should never be labeled as a coping skill in a treatment plan. Engagement in YPA services is voluntary. It should not be a treatment goal. It should be something that is done on the side that that the youth chooses to engage in. Okay. Conversations between YPAs and youth must follow HIPAA guidelines. However, YPAs are not expected to inform staff of what youth disclosed if what was said is not a threat to themselves or others. As a YPA, you are not an informant. You don't go back to the staff and be, yes, this youth said this, and this. That's unnecessary. That's stepping out of your role. YPA should work collaboratively with the providers without breaking the youth's right to privacy. So what does a YPA do on a daily basis working in residential settings? Anyone want to give me some points? Maybe something that you do daily, or maybe something you do on a weekly basis. Or for supervisors, what do you expect your YPAs to do on a daily basis? Exemplify frustration tolerance through coping skills and radical acceptance. Absolutely. Really good. We want to role model things. Support groups and one-on-one peer mentoring. Yep. Participate in team meetings to ensure that the youth voice is prioritized? Absolutely. YPAs can simply greet and do small check-ins with youth to help youth in social engagements. Yes, I want to draw attention to that one. Check-ins. Check-ins are fantastic ways to build a relationship gradually with that youth. And so while working in a residential setting, I had a youth who would cry at night very frequently, very often. She would keep it to herself. She would silently cry. Now, in this high risk setting, the doors were not allowed to be fully shut. So if you came close to her door, you could hear it. But if you weren't close to her door, you wouldn't know that she was crying because the light was off and everything. So as someone in my role, what I would do is just go knock on her door. I know it's only like maybe 30 minutes after the designated bedtime, but I'm going to knock on her door, check in, see how she's doing. Some nights that she would be fine and just staying up reading. Other nights she would be crying, and me sitting there outside her door listening made a big difference. And that was simply because I went and checked in on her. So offer check-ins to the youth after school. Yep, great opportunity. Allow them to vent about their day. Have scheduled sessions. Yeah, something that you might be able to do is have a scheduled lunch session, just the youth and the YPA eating lunch together. I think they would observe what is going on and facilitate youth in finding ways to cope positively. Absolutely. Thank you all for your responses. So YPA residential responsibilities. I have developed a YPA in residential setting job description that I really encourage everyone to utilize. It has been put in the chat and it will also be sent out to everyone. We're going to be going over some of these different responsibilities. However, what I present in this training is not all inclusive of what is on the job description. Now, I also want to include on the job description, there's many different types of responsibilities. A YPA can perform all of those responsibilities or only a few that the supervisor designates as what they need. So it can be flexible. But in this setting, based on the YPA scope of practice, these are the things that a YPA could do to support the multidisciplinary team and the youth. So there are various responsibilities that YPAs can commit to. YPAs should familiarize themselves with the youth case and learn about the youth background, culture, cultural considerations, identifying triggers, strengths, coping skills, treatment goals, and more. We don't have to read really deep into a youth treatment plan to be able to read an overview and understand. And I will say that reading the youth's file is important because you will identify triggers. For example, I was working with a youth that hated to be called by her full name. She preferred a nickname. Now, someone who didn't read her case file would not read that that was a trigger. They would only read her first name filled out on all of the paperwork. When we were in a situation where this youth was very angry and upset, one of the staff members called her by her full name, and this youth became extremely triggered and it escalated into a crisis situation. If that staff member had overviewed the file, they would have seen how this was a major trigger. So reviewing the case file is important. So we also want to remain open to learning about the youth directly from the youth. Some information in a youth case file is not going to be what the youth agrees with. Okay, they might not agree with the fact that they've been labeled as an aggressive individual. They might not feel they are aggressive. They might feel that someone blew that out of proportion. So we want to be open to what the youth's perspective is as well. Youth can clarify any questions that you have regarding their treatment plan and facilitate open discussions between the youth and providers. We want to continue to advocate for the youth's perspectives and needs. If a youth does not feel that they are being labeled correctly, this would be a great opportunity for the YPA to encourage proper self-advocacy skills. Once a week, a YPA can be expected to facilitate a youth support group, and we talked about that. Throughout the day, one-on-one interaction, walks around campus, eating meals together. It can be check-ins, visiting a library, a public park, or a college campus. There's a lot of different things that we can do. Collaborating with the team, that is golden. A YPA should be a great asset to a multidisciplinary team because you're the middleman. Take that role really important because you are helping the youth engage in treatment and you're helping the providers be able to effectively support the youth. So with any service, YPA should document the care that they are providing because it is a billable service, and we also want to keep track of progress, successes, or challenges. Now, documentation is going to be different depending on the organization and the agency and what their codes are and regulations. So YPA documentation can be very brief. It can be dot jots, we talked about this, youth success with this, youth reported challenges with this. 3 sentences, golden, that might be sufficient enough. Other times there might be need for more thorough documentation, such as if a youth discloses that they're having self-harm and suicidal ideation, that might need a few more sentences. You might want to specifically quote what the youth said. Any documentation can be shared with the providers. And this is part of the bridging, is the youth has communicated to you, and now you're communicating the important key moments or the important key points to the providers. So in the YPA 4-day training to receive your professional certification, we do thoroughly discuss documentation from the YPA perspective. As YPAs, if you have any questions regarding documentation, what you should document, what you shouldn't, if the agency wants you to document, refer to your supervisor, check in with them. Strategic self-disclosure. This is a really important aspect of being a YPA and working in this residential setting. Youth who feel that an adult can relate to them, has also experienced something, they're more likely to trust them. In my experience working in residential settings, at one setting, I very specifically did not disclose that I had experience in a residential setting. In another setting, I did. And I did this because I wasn't sure how the youth would respond and receive me sharing that. However, when I did share it, I found that that youth started to trust me more. She felt like I understood the challenges that she was experiencing. When I shared that I had experience in a residential setting, I did not go into details. I did not say where. I did not say how long. That information, those details, they're not relevant. You don't have to share that. You can say, I stayed in a residential setting and it was really hard. I struggled with this, but this is how I got out and I accomplished my treatment goals. And this is the benefit. Talk about the benefit of being in that setting. For me, I needed 24/7 care. I needed intensive emotional support, and I received that in a residential setting. So I emphasize I gained emotional support that I wasn't receiving at home. That's a benefit. Emphasize your personal benefits from being in a residential setting. So that way these youth feel that, well, there might be some benefits to this too. So YPAs share their story to challenge stereotypes and stigmas. Youth in residential settings may have a lot of stigmas or internalized stigmas regarding their experience, mental health, and other difficulties. So as a YPA, we can really challenge that negative thinking pattern about themselves and their experiences from that peer perspective. In our 4-day training, we also do an activity that we role play strategic sharing, and we talk about proper boundaries when it comes to sharing. So I encourage YPAs to pursue that 4-day training. Adjustment and transitioning challenges. It is a very, very difficult adjustment to living in a residential setting. And that is why in the beginning, we see some youth who are very resistant and frustrated and avoidant. And they might have a lot of negative behaviors and things to say about being in a residential setting. This is normal. We have to expect it. We have to accept it. And we have to remain patient and understanding of this. There's a really long list of adjustment challenges, a long list. This is not all inclusive. They may feel rejected, excluded, unwanted. We already talked about that, and we really want to be able to support them and challenge those perspectives. As with any environment where multiple youth are gathered, there's going to be disagreements, there's going to be arguments, there's going to be peer-to-peer challenges. Disliking youth that they're living with and having conflicts makes it even harder to adjust to that living environment, especially if you feel that these other youth are making fun of your personal challenges, which does happen in these residential settings because some youth want to feel better about themselves by taking away how serious their challenge is and emphasizing someone else's challenge. And that's something that as YPAs, we want to intervene in. We want to teach more compassion. So survivors of human trafficking, youth survivors of human trafficking may also be in residential settings. This is oftentimes a very difficult time because they have just been rescued or just been found that and identified that they were trafficked. Youth who have been trafficked rarely identify with being trafficked. They're going to idolize the person who trafficked them. They're going to feel safe, wanted, and secure in the trafficker. They're going to really have a very difficult victim mindset. And it's very important for us to remain compassionate and non-judgmental. We also don't want to challenge any of the youth's perceptions of their abuser. That is not within our role. If a youth says anything positive about the person that abused them, just listen, okay? And then document it, and then let their therapist know, because that's the therapist's role. Youth who haven't been trafficked but are residing in a residential setting have a greater risk because their perception of adults might be different. They really want to feel wanted, and the predator is going to capitalize on that. So youth in these settings also need to learn proper boundaries and what is a safe adult and what is not a safe adult. And as YPAs, we can have some conversations about safe adults and unsafe adults. It's really important. It's very, very important to talk about this risk. Okay, so how can we support youth who are struggling with adjustment and transition? So we want to strive to remain unconditionally patient, no matter how long it takes, no matter what challenges, no matter what they say, how they act out, behaviors, emotional responses, please remain patient. We want to meet the youth exactly where they are at without judgment, assumptions, or anger, and that is going to make the youth feel more secure in your presence, even if they're not outwardly displaying that. Your consistency is going to reassure them. Give reassurances that they are valued and cared for, that you care for them. Remind them that their family might care for them. If they have challenges with their family, then maybe don't say that. Maybe say your friends care for you. You know, pick a different family member. Find what supports the youth trust and use that to emphasize that they are cared for. Clarify and explain program expectations. Give information as to why a rule is in place. For example, during a crisis situation, we would have the youth who are not involved in the crisis go to their rooms and close the door. That way, the youth in a crisis had their privacy, and if there was any physical altercation, the other youth were away and safe. One of the youth I was working with was very triggered by being in a room with the door closed by themselves. So initially, she was very avoidant of that. She did not follow this rule. It was very confusing, and I was very worried about her safety. I had a conversation with her. I also learned that this was a trigger for her, and I began to understand. I clarified the rule to her so she understood that this was a safety concern, but she clarified to me she can't comply with that. She can't do that. So we had to develop a different plan to support her, and the plan was that someone would take her for a walk so she would be removed from the environment and she wouldn't have to stay in her room alone. And that was us helping in that adjustment in the transition to this setting, finding what worked for her. All right, more responses in the chat, guys. What types of boundaries do you maintain at work? And I want us to consider with who, why, and how you maintain boundaries. And we can have YPAs and supervisors answer this. Rebecca says, I present myself as a professional friend. No personal contact. Yep, boundaries. Work stays at work. Yes, we can enforce that with our engagement. However, sometimes it's hard to mentally leave work at work, and we're going to talk about that later on. Informing youth and parents of when and what days I could be reached at, absolutely. Keeping my age private, yes, 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 your age is private. Please, please, please do not share your age with a youth. And also maybe keep it private from your coworkers, because people associate stigmas and negative perceptions with age, and we don't want that to occur. Maintaining confidentiality. Um, you can contact me, but I can't guarantee a response. Yep. Yep, letting a youth know that they're not to be contacted during a crisis or to not to be used as that primary crisis support. Absolutely. These are great boundaries, guys. All right, introducing right in, professional boundaries. Oh, I see in the chat, I do not let anyone know if I do or do not have social media. Yes, 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 yes. Big, big thing. I had a youth contact me on social media. I did not respond. What I did is I immediately blocked that youth. And then in person, I had a discussion about appropriate professional boundaries. Contacted me on Instagram. I blocked them on Instagram. Okay. Try to establish appropriate boundaries of what is acceptable and not ahead of time. When you're talking about your role and scope of practice, also clarify, we can't have contact outside of this setting. Please do not reach out to me on social media. And go over that. If it continues to be a problem, that might be something to talk to your supervisor about. So it's critical to maintain appropriate boundaries with the youth in order to provide quality of care. If you break professional boundaries, you are no longer effectively or correctly supporting that youth, even if you have positive intentions. First and foremost, never perform a task that you are not comfortable with. If you're not comfortable with that task, please ask a staff member to support you and that youth. You might also directly tell that youth that, no, I can't do what you're asking for because it's outside of my scope of practice, and then clarify your role. It's really okay to repeatedly clarify your role. You're continuing to establish that boundary. Make sure that you clarify what topics can stay private between you and the youth versus what topics that you would be required to inform their other providers. Remember your role dynamic and what that entails, and avoid stepping over your role as a friend or as a therapist. You know, someone put in the chat as a professional friend. So with that, I completely understand the perspective of, I'm a professional, but as a YPA, I'm equal to the youth. I'm in support. I'm more of a friend than I am a provider. But I kind of want us to avoid using the word friend with the youth, because youth can develop a different perception of that word. Just like some youth might have a different perception of the term family. Some youth feel like my friends are my family and not their blood family. Some people might associate the term friend in the same type of context. So we also want to be careful about youth lashing out on others when they are angry, overwhelmed, anxious, or hurt. If a youth is yelling at you, insulting you, or behaving in a maladaptive way, please never take it personally. It is not a personal thing. Even if they're saying really hurtful insults directly at you, remember that this is a behavior, and behind that behavior is a learned experience, is a trauma response, is a trigger. Keep that in mind. More boundaries with youth. Sometimes youth will identify a staff member that they prefer. The relationship is positive and supportive. However, the youth might use this relationship as an advantage for personal gain. A YPA really needs to be cautious of excessive altruistic behaviors. These behaviors may include giving the youth special gifts, allowing them to take break during, allowing them to break certain rules. The youth might have special requests for certain privileges or accommodations. You might let a youth use your cell phone, or you might not monitor them appropriately. And this can be a big challenge. I want to talk about transference and countertransference and altruism. So working in one residential setting, I experienced countertransference. where I developed an emotional attachment to a youth by perceiving them as a family member. Now, this happens very subtly. It's gradual. You don't expect it to happen. In your mind, it's not instant like, oh, that's a family member. It doesn't happen like that. It's a gradual development of an emotional or mental attachment. When this occurred, I didn't realize it. Now, this youth was about 10 years old, and he reminded me of my nephew, someone who I haven't had contact with in several years. So when I saw this youth who looks like him, who has some of the same challenges, I developed a more of a want to support in an aunt type of way. I started to give this youth special privileges. I brought him chips at night. I let him use my cell phone to play on a video game that I also really enjoyed that video game. This led to challenges. I was also breaking boundaries with this youth, and it also negatively impacted me. Once I realized I had experienced countertransference, I decided I had to distance myself from this youth, which really negatively impacted the youth because they didn't know why I was distancing myself from them. If I had maintained that professional boundary, wouldn't have been in that situation. When I didn't allow this youth to play a video game on my phone because it was not acceptable time, they had a crisis. They behaved in a very maladaptive way and was physically aggressive towards different objects because they were very frustrated with me. If I had not initially let this youth play video games on my phone, we would have never been in a situation where I said no, and then they had a crisis. These boundaries are important. And if you find that you're struggling with these boundaries, if you recognize you're experiencing countertransference, tell your supervisor, tell your personal therapist, talk about it, develop a plan on how you're going to move forward. Boundaries with our supervisor. Again, do not perform any tasks that you are not comfortable with. If your supervisor says you have to perform a task that you are not comfortable with, advocate for yourself. Express that you're not comfortable with this for XYZ reason. If they continue to emphasize that like you have to do this, then reach out to the director, or you can reach out to me, you can reach out to other supports, you can contact professional supports, or you can very much express that, hey, I'm not going to do this, and if you expect me to do this, I'm not going to be able to perform this responsibility and accommodate to this. And be secure in that. If you have a boundary, maintain that boundary. Triggers. Triggers are very, very important to address. So I want to speak to supervisors directly. When you have a YPA, talk about triggers. How you can go about this is have a meeting in supervision and say, hey, some YPAs struggle with different mental health challenges because they're at different stages of their healing and recovery journey. In order to support you the best that I can, I was wondering if you'd be comfortable sharing with me some triggers you might experience working in this setting. It is perfectly acceptable to initiate that conversation, even though it might be uncomfortable. Reassure the YPA that they don't have to share anything that they're not comfortable with. You only want to know how you can support them if they are triggered. I had told my supervisor in the high-risk residential setting that I could not work alone with two youth because one youth was very aggressively violent that triggered my own trauma, and then the other youth had suffered a very intense trauma that I also experienced. Now, there was a situation where I was left alone with just those two youth, and there was a crisis. The youth with the same trauma as my own, she ended up having a very, very vivid flashback and was vocalizing this flashback, and her body language was also going through the motions of this flashback. It was a very, very vivid flashback. That severely triggered my own traumas because at that point, her flashback was triggering my own flashback. And even though I had learned the professional skills to keep composure and support her, my heart was racing, I was sweating, I was trying very hard to stay grounded, and I was starting to get emotionally upset. While she was experiencing that flashback, the other youth who engages in violent behavior was having his own crisis where he was now kicking and punching the walls and yelling and speaking profanities. And it was very overwhelming because I was also the target of his anger. He just hadn't approached me yet. He was targeting the inanimate objects. Very difficult situation to youth that I said, please do not let me work with alone. I had no support from the backup staff, and I called on the walkie-talkie for support and no one came. I reported this to my supervisors. I expressed it to them in an email. I expressed how it drastically impacted my mental health. I had to take 2 days off of work because it had such intensely impacted me. The trigger was not respected. I brought it up to my supervisor. I requested a meeting. No meeting. 1 week later, I sent a follow-up email. No meeting. My reason for leaving that residential setting was solely based on the fact that my supervisor did not respect my trigger. And then when it negatively impacted my mental health, they did not attend to my needs. I left 3 weeks later after that experience. And I left on short notice. I sent an email with my resignation. That is how much I want us to take these triggers seriously. If you want to maintain YPAs as your staff, you have to prioritize their triggers, because otherwise it will negatively impact their mental health and they will leave eventually. So I apologize for the seriousness of that. It's a very intense experience when you're in a residential setting and you've been triggered and you still have to support the youth. So I want to go into supervision, because this is a really important aspect of supporting our YPAs and career development. So supervisors, why do you provide supervision? What do you find is the purpose, and how does supervision benefit the YPA? Any thoughts from supervisors or even directors? Okay, providing support for the YPA to balance their own professionalism and personal needs that directly impact their role and to empower professional development. 100%, A+ response, love it. Okay, so I want to share a bit more about supervision. So with supervision, this is a great opportunity to develop the YPA's skills. It's a great opportunity to address any challenges that you notice the YPA might be having. It's a great opportunity for the YPA to express any challenges and also emphasize successes. It's a great opportunity to say, hey, you're doing really well working with this youth. That's fantastic. In the chat, we have to provide a place and process where YPAs can talk about their work and receive both support and feedback. Yes, constructive feedback is great. Supervisors provide supervision to make sure that the job is being done correctly, is also correct what may be done in a different way, and provide feedback. Yep. As a check-in, how are things going? What challenges are you facing? Absolutely. All of these are great responses. Supervision is really valuable. So I encourage supervision to occur once a week or once every other week. Oh no, sorry, it went all the way back. I don't know why it did that, guys, bear with me. Okay,
While you're doing
boundaries with coworkers, there we go. So as before, never perform a task that you're not comfortable with. If you've been asked to perform a task that is outside of your role, let them know you can't, let your supervisor know. Inform your supervisor um, of any boundary crossings. Also document this, because if there is a organization professional investigation into a boundary crossing, you want to make sure that you have accurately documented the interaction. So if there's a boundary crossing, regardless on if you personally address that with the coworker or not, document it. Put it in a little note in your phone, send an email to your supervisor, have it available. And then in the case of an investigation, if things progress, you have this to be able to provide. I had a coworker who did not respect my role as a YPA, and I consistently felt that she was hostile towards me. It occurred over the span of several weeks. I documented each moment. After several weeks, there was an investigation. I was able to provide all of my documentation. So it's important. When we talk about crisis intervention, some staff might ask the YPA to become a crisis intervention support. It's fine if you're a backup support, but not the primary support. Also, you don't have to share all of your information to your coworkers. If your coworkers have curiosity about your lived experience, they can have their curiosity. You don't have to share that. The purpose of you sharing is strictly to benefit the youth. If you're sharing with your coworker, how is that benefiting the youth? And how is it going to impact your relationship with them? So consider what you're comfortable sharing. Okay, if boundaries are crossed. Oh, wait, no. Boundaries with self, I apologize. Reflect on and identify triggers ahead of time. Honor your limits. Develop a coping plan. We're going to talk about what a coping plan is in a minute. Identify what you're comfortable disclosing to youth before you disclose. Maintain your own self-care routine. It can be very stressful and difficult to work in a residential setting. Maintaining self-care is really important. And commit to your own personal healing and recovery. If you are not healthy yourself, then you're not going to be able to provide the highest quality of care to the youth you're supporting. All right, if boundaries are crossed, let your supervisor know, clarify your role, always inform the individuals. Also, reach out to us at Families Together. We have monthly meetings where we talk about professional development, receive support, guidance, engage in those meetings. It's a great opportunity to talk about any of these challenges. All right. So now we're going to take a 5-minute break. We are back. I love the different comments in the chat. So for the sake of time, I'm going to be kind of breezing through some of these slides so that way I can emphasize the most important slides that I really want us to retain. And so how do we support a youth through a mental health crisis? Individuals who are attending this might have lots of information and lots of ideas on how to support youth, and I do want us to remember those. But there's also some different strategies that we can use that are structured. So we have ALGE. This is a very specific acronym that you can review during the Mental Health First Aid certification. It is an 8-hour training, sometimes 5 hours, depending on the organization that you receive it from. Highly recommend it for all YPAs attending this. Although crisis intervention is not within your scope of practice, it is a valuable skill to have, and it will help you when providing crisis intervention support. So there's many different types of crisis that can occur in a residential setting. A youth can AWOL, or they leave the building or the residence without approval. They have a weapon. Weapons can be very many different things depending on the youth. So be careful of that. Being placed in a restraint, inanimate objects in the mouth. I was working with a youth that whenever she put an inanimate object in the mouth, like a battery, a piece of plastic, a crayon, anything, We knew she was about to engage in violent behavior because when you have something in your mouth, you cannot be physically restrained. So that was a strategic move that she did. Excessive yelling or screaming, experiencing flashbacks, experiencing medical emergency, many different types. Reasons for why youth have a crisis: they feel trapped, confined, they're triggered internally or externally. We're going to talk about those different types. They don't want to engage in routine and they feel like they're being forced. And that's why, as a YPA, we don't force someone, we give them the options and they can make whatever choice they want, and we remain accepting and supportive. They might be extremely angry at someone, and that's going to affect how they behave and engage. They might be experiencing symptoms of mental, emotional, behavioral health disorder. We want to be compassionate to those symptoms and how they manifest as behaviors. Or if they feel like their boundaries have been crossed, they might have a crisis because they don't know how to advocate for themselves. So the role of a YPA is to not be the first responder. We are backup support. Reflect, rephrase, validate, summarize, clarify. Those are our go-to actions when we're providing that support. If there are other people around, advocate for the youth's triggers to be respected. I talked about that case where a staff member said the youth's full name. That would be a great opportunity to say, hey, this youth feels triggered by their full name. Great opportunity to advocate for the youth feels supported by you. You're potentially reducing an escalated situation. Practice the steps of LG. Practice the steps of a therapeutic crisis intervention. We're going to briefly talk about TCI. And then sit in on the life space interview and assist in facilitating a resolution discussion. A life space interview occurs after a crisis, and the goal of it is to reduce the crisis and develop a plan on how the youth can manage their situation in the future. So talking about physical restraints, there are trainings to receive on how to properly perform a physical restraint on a youth. I will say, as someone working in a residential setting, this is at times absolutely necessary because the youth is actively harming themselves or they're actively harming other individuals. A physical restraint is performed after several other crisis intervention strategies have been used and were unsuccessful. A staff is expected to provide 3 verbal prompts, direct warnings before a restraint occurs. If this staff member does not provide 3 verbal prompts, then they are not following TCI regulations, and you can advocate for the youth on that behalf. They have not received adequate warning and given the opportunity to de-escalate. The life space interview is the resolution conversation. We want to establish a sense of safety. We want to clarify the event for the youth and the adult. And we want to repair and restore the relationship and help the youth learn emotional regulation skills so that way they can re-enter the regular activities. So I want to bring attention to how youth feel about restraints and how YPAs feel about restraints. To maintain the integrity of trust and rapport between the youth and the YPAs shouldn't be able to restrain the youth. It completely changes the power balance. And now the youth is in an extremely disenfranchised position, and the YPA is now providing a service that is outside of their scope of practice. If a YPA is requested or trained or required to perform a restraint, as that YPA, you can say it is not within my scope of practice. And if that is continued to be pressured on you, you can encourage your supervisor to review by OMH regulations and reach out to them. They are the ones who will clarify it. As YPAs ourselves, not within our scope of practice, it damages the relationship, as evident on here. Restraints, I want to bring attention to one quote. Restraints make me feel like I'm about to be raped. Even though I told staff and it's in my case file, they still restrained me. That is my quote. I experienced that. And it was very difficult as a youth to try and say, don't restrain me, I'll calm down, but it's not, the proper steps were not taken. And even though it was in my case file, it still occurred. This is something that continues to happen. Youth continue to be restrained despite it being a trigger. Now, this is not to say that restraint should not occur. There are definitely times where it is a necessity. However, it should be the last resort. Not all agencies follow the correct regulations, and not all staff are going to properly follow TCIA practices. So as a YPA, you can observe this and we can report it to the supervisor. It is not within our role as a YPA to say you're doing your job wrong. It is our role to observe and then let the supervisor know, because it's outside of our practice. So what can a YPA do during a restraint? Advocate, bridge, coach, encourage natural supports, and skill building. All of these things we can do before, during, and after a restraint has occurred. Now, if a restraint is a trigger for you, as a YPA, remove yourself from the environment. However, if it's not going to be a trigger, then do your best to support the youth and try to help them calm down and reduce their intense expression of emotion. That way, a restraint is more avoidable. YPAs should be working the best that they can to reduce the need of a restraint. If you can help talk someone down with support from others, great. If you are actively working with a youth and they are actively being restrained, if you can be that calm, secure, trusting voice that's there, that's a great support. Reassure the youth of prior times that they were successful in reducing their stress, so that way they can fall back on that and know that they can calm down. They will be successful. So coping skills to support youth who are triggered. We've talked a lot about general coping skills. Now there's grounding and distracting. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 senses, identifying things in the environment that match the senses. 5 things that are blue, 4 things that are soft, 2 things that I can smell. Tip, the temperature is temperature. So changing our temperature by putting cold water on our face, stepping outside in the snow. I is intensive activity. So that would be the exercise. P is paced breathing, so a breathing exercise, and P is also progressive muscle relaxation. That's a great skill that you can teach these youth, but they might not be open to it. Going to mental coping skills. Check the facts. If a youth is experiencing intense emotions, help them check the facts. What occurred that caused you to experience this? If they have an assumption that someone, let's say, betrayed them, you can help them check the facts. Why do you feel this person betrayed you? What evidence do you have for that? Build mastery by reflecting on past successes. We've talked about that. Identifying pros and cons. I had a youth who wanted to break up with their boyfriend, who also happened to be in the residential setting. She was very struggling with it. So we developed a pros and cons chart. Was action 1, action 2, pros of that, cons of that. And how she wanted to break up with him was first in a very maladaptive way. After discussing pros and cons of 2 different strategies, we developed a better plan. Great opportunity to teach skill building. So what challenges do you experience with maintaining wellness at work? I am going to continue forward, but you can put in the chat what challenges you might experience. Types of triggers. These types of triggers occur for youth and for us. External triggers, things in our environment that trigger us. Someone's face, a certain smell, a sound. Internal triggers, strong emotional responses to a present moment, but that emotional response is rooted in a past experience. For example, when the youth I was working with was experiencing a flashback, I had an internal trigger because my emotional response was also a flashback. Her herself was not triggering me based on her appearance. It was not triggering on the smell. None of that. It was my emotional response that triggered me. Trauma triggers, triggers specifically related to a trauma that occurred that impact the nervous system. And then a symptom trigger, a physical or environmental change, which influences greater mental health challenges. I have depression when it's winter and it's darker earlier for extended periods of time. Sometimes my depression increases. That's a symptom trigger. So ways that we can work through triggers while working. So examples of triggers that we might face. A case file that contains details of a traumatic experience. That's how I learned that I couldn't work with one of the youth, because in their case file, I read that they experienced the same thing I did, and I just couldn't manage that. A youth discloses that they've been abused. They disclose details about it. I had one youth who told me straight out he wets the bed because he experienced a lot of sexual abuse. That could be a triggering comment for some people. That was also his self-awareness. It was a difficult. Uses verbal statements to cause emotional distress towards others. A youth might specifically be trying to trigger someone else because they are angry. Managing triggers. Utilize your coping plan, practice grounding techniques, separate yourself from the youth's experience. Consistently remind yourself that you are safe. What the youth is experiencing is not your trauma, it is their trauma, even if you guys have similarities. Validate the youth's experiences, encourage the youth to speak to their counselor, remove yourself from the environment, and to do that, ask another staff to come support the youth. And then of course, inform your supervisor. So vicarious trauma, exposure to a traumatic event that causes exposure to the traumatic event experiences of another that causes an intense emotional, physical, or mental response within yourself. Vicarious trauma can happen in a short amount of time, or it can happen over an extended period of time. Vicarious trauma is going to drastically impact your mental health, especially if you have also experienced similar traumas. It can be easier for vicarious trauma to occur if you have the same trauma of the youth that you're working with, because it starts to trigger your own, and now you might be visualizing you going through that occurrence that the youth is expressing. So it can be intrusive thoughts, images, or nightmares about the youth or the youth's trauma occurring, experiencing bystander guilt, like you can't help this youth, so now you feel guilty because you can't support them, but we're not going to be able to be a superhero. We have to keep that in mind. Unhealthy coping response to work, YPAs. If the moment you leave work, you have to have a drink, you have to smoke, you have to engage in a substance, you have to engage in an unhealthy coping skill, you are not managing the stress of this job effectively. That's the time to reach out to your personal supports or to reach out to your supervisor. Develop a plan on how you can manage the stress. Coping with vicarious trauma, self-awareness, participate in your own professional support. Work-life balance. Do not take the responsibility of the youth's challenges and progress and everything as your own. You're not responsible for them. You are a support for them. Don't take on the responsibility of their healing journey. Prioritize healthy coping strategies. Acts of affirmation, self-acceptance, and self-compassion. Accept yourself. Understand that you're experiencing vicarious trauma. It is okay. You are going to work through it, and have compassion for how it's impacting you. And then determine if you are able to effectively work with the youth. Again, if you are experiencing vicarious trauma and you're triggered by the youth, then you might not be able to support them effectively. Compassion fatigue and burnout. Compassion fatigue is a combination of physical, emotional, and mental and spiritual depletion. You are now experiencing intense levels of depression strictly around work. Burnout is the inability to provide effective and quality support due to extended periods of compassion fatigue or employment dissatisfaction. Burnout is the last stage of wellness challenges when it comes to working. Once you hit burnout, you are more likely to resign unexpectedly. So why should we consider the impact of a youth's trauma when working with them, some trauma-informed practices. So trauma-informed practices, the key points provided by SAMHSA is safety, trustworthiness and transparency, collaboration and neutrality, peer support, empowerment and choice, cultural, historical, and gender issues. We want to consider all of these things when we're working with youth. Keep it in mind. Know how these can impact the youth. How do you conduct yourself? How do you demonstrate these practices? Trauma-informed practices, we want to challenge the phrase, what is wrong with you? That's a very stigmatizing statement. We want to change it to what happened to you? What happened to you that impacted you, that influenced what you're occurring? Address the individual's unique experiences and perceptions, awareness of how trauma and chronic stress response will impact the youth. We have the flight, fight, freeze, and fawn response. Fawn is not usually known. It's a newer one. Fawn is when we try to appease the abuser or the perpetrator or whoever is harming us in that moment. We want to make them happy. We're going to do what they say. We're going to kind of submit to what is occurring because we're trying to alleviate how serious or how violent it might be. Avoid re-traumatization, really important, especially if the youth is triggered. We don't want to do the things that trigger youth. And reinforce resiliency. As a YPA, we want to always reinforce resiliency. These skills include patience, adaptability, emotional regulation, acceptance, optimism, and goal setting. Youth who have survived chronic traumas and abuse do not feel empowered or resilient. Like I said earlier, they might feel that they have no future or that they are too damaged to heal. That's something that we want to take under consideration. So the pair of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, all youth in residential settings have experienced the ACEs. They might have experienced a few, or they might have experienced many. I highly encourage YPAs to look further into adverse childhood experiences on your own time and understand how these experiences may impact a youth's behavior. How do you maintain wellness at work? This is really important for this stressful environment. Peer wellness strategies. So we have supervision and professional supports. We talked about that, really valuable. Reach out to the Families Together supports. We have those monthly meetings and it's a great opportunity. We also have monthly trainings and some of these trainings might include wellness strategies like this one. Maintain boundaries, practice self-compassion. It's going to be hard working in this setting. You're not always going to feel successful. You're not always going to feel like you did good work. Practice self-compassion because sometimes we will base our success on the youth's success. And that's what we need to keep separate. Remember your motivator. What motivated you to take on this job? Why are you a YPA? When things are getting really hard and you're wondering, why am I still working here? Remember your motivator. That's why you're working there. Maintain personal recovery. If your job is dependent upon your lived experience, it's important to continue to maintain personal recovery. So a coping plan, if we are triggered, these are the steps that we can go in order. Supervisors, I encourage you to take note of this. It's a resource that you could provide to your YPA so they can develop their own coping plan. YPAs, I encourage you to take note of this. Think about how you would set up your own coping plan, maybe draft it out later on, so that way you have a very constructed plan. Neutral body language and composure. If you struggle with showing your emotion on your face when you have been triggered, that might be a time when you have to remove yourself immediately. For me, I'm able to keep my face composed and my body language neutral. So I can be triggered, but someone else is not going to be able to tell. Separate your personal experiences, grounding techniques, encourage the youth to talk to the professional supports. Maybe say, hey, I'm not quite sure how to help you with this or support you with this, but I think your counselor might help. Or, hey, have you talked to your counselor about this? Or just encouraging that, really encouraging them to rely on the counselor. Remove yourself from the situation and then develop your own coping skills strategy. Go to a private location, take a moment in the bathroom, in the break room, just collect yourself. Talk to your supervisor. If your supervisor is not available, talk to the team lead. If you don't have a team lead, send your supervisor a text. Go on break. Always inform your supervisor before you go on break. And when we go on an unexpected break, you have to let your supervisor know that this is a mental health need, not just, I want to take my break early. Contact a trusted support, call them up in the middle of the day, be like, hey, I'm triggered, I need to talk. Let's go through it. And then if you still aren't able to regulate your own trigger, leave work early. Prioritize your mental health. Let your supervisor know that you are unable to perform your responsibilities today and you have to take care of yourself. And that is completely acceptable. Transition rituals before work and after work. I have my own transition ritual. I do yoga for 10 minutes in the morning. I drink my tea. When I was working in a residential setting on my way to work, I would listen to a podcast about youth mental health and youth therapy. So that way I would get myself into that mindset. On my way home from work, I would listen to a sermon because that makes me feel good and it made me feel fulfilled. Develop your own work transitions. It's going to really help you mentally go into the space of work and come out of it and try to help you separate your work life and your work mentality from your personal mentality. Self-care techniques, prioritize your breaks. Even if you're not going to eat, take your break, go for a walk around campus independently, sit in your car, call a friend, scroll social media, take your break. Implement your work transition sleep schedules. If you are only getting 3 hours of sleep before working a 10-hour shift in a residential setting, you're going to struggle. You're going to really, really struggle, especially if you have to stay later and now you're working a 14-hour shift. 3 hours of sleep, that's not enough, guys. You got to get more sleep. Indulge in personal hobbies and interests. Positive affirmations. Positive affirmations might feel fake to some people because they don't feel what they're saying. However, positive affirmations are meant to train our brain to think differently. So a positive affirmation might be, I did really successful, productive work today. Now, you might not feel you did that because you had some challenges with the youth. However, we still want to acknowledge that and train our brain to start to recognize what were the successes, what was productive, even if we're struggling and focusing on one negative. Prioritize yourself. You come first. All right, so that concludes the training content. Now, I did a lot of different interviews to collect information and perspectives on what YPAs and supervisors thought would be important. There's a lot of topics that I didn't cover. All of these topics were expressed that they wanted training on before or during working in a residential setting. So take note of this, YPAs, pursue learning information about this on your own time. Supervisors, provide some resources to your YPAs to learn this information. Okay. Now I'm ending with this quote. If you are qualified to do your job because of your recovery, then part of your professional development includes maintaining your recovery. As YPAs, we have lived experience. We have experienced trauma, abuse, systems involvement, addiction. We have our own challenges. In order to maintain our wellness, our ability to provide quality care, we have to take care of ourselves. That's why when I was really triggered by working with the two youth who I was not comfortable working with, I took 2 days off of work because I was extremely impacted by that situation. I had to maintain my recovery. I came back, was able to provide quality of care. But if I had gone in that day after experiencing that trigger, I wouldn't have been able to keep composure. Maintain your personal recovery. It's very important, not only for you, but also to provide quality care. All right. So what are your takeaways from this training? If you want to just put them in the chat, we're going to have a time for questions in just a second, but I want to know what you guys got from this. What was most important, most impactful, something that you hadn't been aware of? Oh, you're very welcome, Rhonda. I'm glad that you got a lot from this. Okay, learning about the different types of triggers, absolutely. Boundaries, one of the hardest things to do. You get ego. Yep, I understand that. That's why boundaries are important. Yep, they are very tough to establish. And I really want all of you YPAs to learn from my experience with difficulties with boundaries. That way you guys don't experience the same challenges that I did and you're able to better support these youth. Hearing personal experiences was very helpful to see things in a different perspective. Thank you. You're very welcome. I'm glad that you gained from my personal experiences. Clarifying expectations in the role. Absolutely. Happy to clarify. The role of YPAs in a crisis. Yep. A ton of reassurance from this training personally. I enjoyed learning about boundaries, not only with youth, but those I work with. Yep. Remaining within my scope, self-disclosure, transition rituals, the importance of communication. Oh, I'm so happy that everyone is getting so much. I'm really happy about that. All right. So you can keep putting in the chat things that you gained from this. I'm really happy. I might review it later just to boost myself up again. But I want to open up the floor to some questions. I know,
Yes,
Kara, you've been tracking the questions, so we're going to address some of those.
yes, I've been tracking some questions. One is if a youth is a constant trigger and I'm not comfortable working with them at the RTF, how do I go about this, especially if I'm the only youth peer advocate and have to provide a service to all patients?
Okay. So first, let your supervisor know that you're not comfortable working with that youth and ask them to please respect that because this is a trigger, which is going to impact your mental health, which will impact your work quality. Then let them know that you would rather not be placed on that unit and you want to avoid that unit. And that can be accommodated to depending on the situation. Next, you don't want that youth to be completely avoided and feel rejected. So what you can try to do is include them in group activities. So that way it's not a one-on-one interaction. Including them on a group activity, such as a support group, might establish a little bit more distance or just playing a game. However, if you are highly triggered and this is a major thing, then that's not going to work for you. Let your supervisor know, try to establish a plan. Hope that helps.
Yeah. And congratulate yourself on your self-awareness. That
Yes.
you're recognizing your trigger, right? And that it is really important to talk about. And it's really common, as you were sharing, Megan. I really appreciate your example around your counter transference as well. My question surrounding what you're saying right now is when the choices are given and it can be followed at the RTF but not followed at home when weekend visits come. That's a big struggle. So wondering about some of your advice happening at the RTF but not maintained at home on visits,
Mhm.
or the other way around. And so
So
if you have,
that's part of the adjustment and the transition challenges. First, we want to acknowledge that this is a challenge that can be confusing to the youth. So we want to open space for this youth to express frustration. We want to see if the higher up, such as the supervisor or whoever the transition staff is, see if they can talk to the parent and see if they can try to come to a commonality between this rule. So it's a little bit similar. It can still be established just in a different way, different environment. If that's not possible, and sometimes it's not going to be, we as the YPA or as the staff in this environment are going to have to remain consistently patient. It's not something the youth is going to be able to easily adjust to. It's not something we're able to find a solution to. So we just have to have space where the youth can express their frustration and be patient on how that adjustment challenge is impacting the youth.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Please chat them in, or even you could raise your hand.
I saw a question up here. Okay, Q&A. If a youth is a constant, oh, we already asked that.
Oh, okay. Faith is expanding a little bit, saying that it sounds like Faith, you're wearing multiple hats, right? Sounds like you work as a peer, but also you have a young person in an RTF, and that your young person doesn't want to be at home and doesn't feel like they need to follow the rules at home. That's very challenging. Any thoughts there,
So
Meg?
So this is going to come more into parenting skills. And first, I want to say that just because you are a parent struggling with this skill to support your youth does not mean that you are a bad parent. Parenting is a skill, just like riding a bike is a skill, and playing a piano is a skill. There's multiple different aspects to it. So I really can't give any insight into parenting. I am not a parent myself, and I don't have training on parenting. So I do apologize for that, but I just don't want to give you incorrect information.
Well, I think I could also chime in a little bit, wondering if there's any support for family therapy for you and your daughter, to get that support because you're both part of a system, and obviously she's part of another system when she's away, but you are her primary system, right? So if there's any way to get support around family therapy, might be really helpful.
Hmm. Having a family peer advocate might also be helpful and supportive towards you. And a family peer advocate can also give that lived experience of being a parent and learning those parenting skills that I, as a YPA, any other questions? We have a few more minutes.
Yeah, you're welcome, Faith. Well, there's some work that we've done for years called the 4 R's and 2 S's with families, and a lot of it is around identifying kind of the responsibilities as a family, communication as a family, is a respectful communication, and rules. What are your rules like? So you can also think about it in that way. I'm happy to give you more information if that's helpful. But thinking about the R's, rules and responsibilities, respectful communication. Okay.
So the
Douglas
guidance
is,
you gave about the role of a YPA role in the RTF supersede the RTF's expectations of the role of a YPA. Okay, that's a really good one. So YPAs have to stay within their scope of practice. If we're stepping outside of our scope of practice, we're no longer providing the services as a YPA. So we really have to emphasize that to our supervisors and the agency. If the agency or the supervisor does not respect the scope of practice and what is within your role, you can let them know that they can contact Families Together for further guidance on this and clarification. We really don't want any YPA to be in a position where they feel forced to do something that's outside of their role. If you as a YPA feel this has occurred, reach out to Families Together. You reach out to higher ups from simply the supervisor. Reach out to the director. Also provide information on your role as a YPA. Provide the job description. Provide the scope of practice paperwork. Let them know that you have to stay within that. And also explain why what they want you to do is stepping outside of your role. If you do not feel that your scope of practice is being respected by an agency, then consider if it's a right fit for you. There are other agencies where you can be employed as a YPA if you don't feel respected at one agency. How do I become a YPA? First step, reach out to Families Together. We have online forms that you can complete on our website. Also, the first step is the online modules, which are self-paced, completely independent. Once you complete the online modules, you fill out the form, let us know, you get your provisional, then there's more steps to get your professional, but that is the first step. Okay, should a YPA be able to work as in a different position while working in separate units, not at the facility at all? Okay, so a YPA can work as two separate positions, two separate part-time jobs. One is a YPA job, the other one is not a YPA job. It can be within the same agency. It should not be with the same kids. It should not be with the same units. It should be completely separate. For example, if you have a YPA working on the residential campus or the living environment, they're a YPA there. But if you have them working in the school, they're still working with the same kids, even if they're in a different role. That's going to create confusion for the kids. However, if you have them working in a different campus, same agency, different campus, different kids, and they're not a YPA in that role, then that might be more workable. However, we also want to check in with the YPA to see and make sure that they feel comfortable with that. All right, let's see. Okay, so we're gonna finish up now. I just want to show you guys my references briefly. I did a lot of research into this. You can look further into these references yourself once you get the slides. I do have 3 pages. So if there's any topics that you found most interesting, by all means, please research. You can find the sources right there. All right, I think that concludes everything.
Can you bring up the ending slides?
Oh, yes, my bad.
No worries.
Okay, here we go.
Thank you so much. Just really quickly, everyone, wanted to talk about our upcoming events, trauma-informed approaches to crisis and de-escalation in youth and families. There are 3 CEs offered. That will be on next Thursday, January 25th from 12:30 to 3:30. Jackie Garlock and Daniel Ton will be presenting. And then we have a podcast at our newest type of offering is a podcast called Voices from the Field. It's just a pilot. We did 5 episodes. I invite you to listen to those. And please give your feedback because we're hoping to do more in the future. And I just want to extend a warm thanks to you, Megan, for all that you've done and for this amazing presentation. We have a new potential youth peer advocate because of it, and it sounds like everyone got a lot out of your presentation. So thank you all. If you all can just fill out the feedback survey as you leave today, we'd really appreciate it. And the slides will be posted by Tuesday or Wednesday. And we wish you all a wonderful weekend.